It's the Notch 6 Online Podcast, episode number 6. This month we help to get your layout on the right track and catch up with Steve Brennisen from Ross Custom Switches. Steve has a lot of great information to share on planning your layout, especially when it comes to switches and track work. Plus, we'll get the history behind Ross Custom Switches. All that and more straight ahead on this episode of Notch 6.
This is the Notch 6 Online Podcast. Notch 6 is the podcast dedicated to O-gauge trains. Whether you're collecting, operating, or just getting started, Notch 6 is your home for O-gauge news, events, and interviews. Now here is your host, Derek Thomas.
Well, welcome to Notch 6, the only online podcast or radio show, depending on what generation you come from, dedicated to O-gauge trains. Whether you're collecting, operating, or just getting started, this is the place for you. And today is no exception as we talk with Steve Brennisen from Ross Custom Switches, who has some great tips on planning your layout. But before we get to that, let's jump right into the news and events section. There's a lot to talk about coming up in August and September.
Keeping you up to date on everything that's coming down the tracks in the world of O-gauge. It's time for the Notch 6 News Desk. The News Desk is brought to you by the Lionel Collectors Club of America. Visit lionelcollectors.org for all the latest LCCA news.
All right, it's news and events time. There's a lot to talk about. Two big events that are just around the corner. Number one is the TW TrainWorx second annual Layout Festival. That's September 14th at their Dallas, Texas headquarters. And judging from the photos from last year, wow, what an experience. You'll get to see a number of TW TrainWorx great layouts set up in person, meet representatives from Lionel, check out all of the latest TW accessories, and so much more. So for our friends that like to travel or our friends who are down in the southwest area of the country, the TW TrainWorx second annual Layout Festival, do not miss it, September 14th in Dallas, Texas. Something for our Midwest folks, September 28th, the LCCA is getting together with Lionel representatives at the Chicagoland Railroad Club. The rumor mill is saying that Lionel is going to bring some new toys to debut, specifically the Legacy LCS system, which is their new iPad app, and also the sensor track system that works with a lot of the new Legacy-equipped locomotives. So that is September 28th. And then one more event coming down the pipeline for those of you that like to travel. Another LCCA event is an event at Disney World in Orlando, Florida from September 27th through the 29th. Now, this is going to be a really neat event, and if I didn't have a calendar so booked up right now, I'd be on the first plane down to Orlando. One of the highlights of the event is the LCCA members are going to get to take a behind-the-scenes tour of the Disneyland, or I should say Disney World, Railroad. And I've done this excursion before where they take you into the park before the park ever opens that morning. It's the only time you'll ever see Disney World so empty. And they take you back on the train to the backstage area of Disney World, and you get to see how they fire the steam locomotives, where they maintain them. You get great insight onto the history of Walt Disney and why he loved railroads so much. And it's just an absolutely amazing event. And this is really a great family event. If your family likes Walt Disney World or likes Disney history, this is putting the best of both worlds together. That event, again, September 27th through the 29th. For more information on the LCCA events, visit lionelcollectors.org. For more information on the TW TrainWorx Layout Festival, you can visit them at twtrainworx.com. What else is going on? Oh, something cool that we just found out about tonight. If you like to watch cool new product videos, you need to check out the Lionel Engineering page on YouTube, and that's under Lionel Engineering, all is one word. Great new video just released tonight on the Legacy LCS system that kind of gives you a nice overview of the new iPad app, and we actually get to see the Legacy Wi-Fi adapter for the first time, and that's going to be an interesting little device, and I think that holds a lot of potential, especially for those of us who like to play with our gadgets on our trains, so to speak. Big updates to the Notch 6 website. If you haven't visited lately, if you're subscribed through iTunes or through Stitcher, visit our website at Notch6, that's Notch and the number 6.com. The shows are all organized now. The website got a nice little overhaul. It's much cleaner and hopefully a little bit easier to navigate. Also, something new this month that I really want to hammer home is we have started an email list. Now, I know a lot of you guys are kind of skittish about providing email addresses. Here's what I'm going to tell you. I'm only going to send out probably 1 or 2 emails a month. And the only reason I'm going to send them out is to give you a preview of what's coming up in next month's show. And also, if I need input in terms of giving you guys a chance to ask questions of our upcoming guests, things like that. We will never sell your email address. We will never spam you. That much I promise. So to sign up for our email list, go to Notch6.com. The email sign-up list is right on the left-hand side of the page. Join the list, and we'll try to send out an email update at the beginning of each month, letting you know what's coming for the month, for the show. And then also, if we need input in terms of questions, that's where we will ask for your information. Now, something else I need to touch base on real quick before we get into the interview with Steve Brennisen from Ross Custom Switches is I've gotten a little bit of grief in the past month. And the reason I'm getting grief is everybody's like, oh, well, you're so, all about the LCCA, Lionel Collectors Club this, Lionel Collectors Club that. And you're right. I love the Lionel Collectors Club of America. But I'm also a TCA member. But here's where I'm going to call out the TCA guys a little bit. I have not heard a peep from anybody from the TCA in terms of getting information on special events, club happenings, anything like that on the Notch 6 podcast. So I'm calling out a TCA member to step up to the plate and become the TCA liaison in terms of bringing information in on upcoming club events and what's going on inside of the world of the TCA. So if anybody kind of wants to step up to the plate from the TCA and get that information on the show, I encourage you to email me at Notch6, that's Notchsix, the number 6 is spelled out in the email address, that's Notch6@gmail.com. Like I said, step up to the plate, email me, and we'll get some TCA news in here as well. And finally, on a sad note, before we jump into this interview, I just want to take a moment to recognize a very special individual and his passing. Most of you have heard by this point that LCCA President Lou Capone passed away unexpectedly a few weeks back. And while I didn't get to know Louis very well, you could tell by the people that were around Louis, especially friends like Al Colas, Dennis DeVito, and a host of others from the LCCA, and any of the folks that had interactions with Louis through his train store, just what a special guy he was. The word polarizing figure is what I've heard most often. And so just wanted to take a moment and send our love and thoughts to Louis' family and to his friends that have been touched by his passing, and our thoughts are with them. All right, it's time to get down to business. This month's interview is with Steve Brenheisen from Ross Custom Switches. There's so much great information in this interview, especially if you're at the beginning of planning a layout or right at the building early stages of a layout. Lots of great information here. We also get some great stories about the early years of Ross Custom Switches. So sit back, relax, put it in Notch 6 because here we go.
This is the Notch 6 online podcast, your home for O-Gauge news, events, and interviews. Here again is Derek Thomas.
Welcome back to the Notch 6 podcast. So happy to have with me today Steve Brenheisen, the man behind Ross Custom Switches. Steve, thanks for coming on the show. We're so happy to have you here.
You're welcome, Derek. Thanks for having me here. As you were giving me the sort of the pre-game pep talk there, you said something that made the hair on the back of my neck stand up. You said, anything you say can be, and I thought for sure you were going to say used against you. if I only had a dime for every time I heard just only a joke, but
I buy off all of my interviews in the form of trains, and in your case, switches. So just send the double cross over my way when we're all said and done, and I promise it'll all come out great on the other end.
I don't know why it is, but that's the fix for everything. Just send me a couple of switches, Steve.
Yes. Well, I tell you what, you guys make such a great product. Let's dive into it this way. Give me a bit of your background and how you grew up and what got you into model railroading.
Well, I just love trains. I lived about a mile from the Illinois Central Main Line in Shadance, Illinois. And you could see them across the fields. It's flat as a pool table there in Illinois, in central Illinois. And you can see a long ways. And I was just fascinated by those trains. I even remember a few steam engines going by. I was born in 1957, so there were still here and there. By the time I was 3 or 4, there was still one here and there going by. Kankakee was the big town near us, and they had quite a big roundhouse and a big 4, and a number of railroads crossed there. So there was a lot of railroad action, and for some reason, it just always fascinated me. And I begged and begged for some trains for years before I got them. I think I was maybe 9, which seemed like forever at the time. And they were HO trains. And my dad, who was quite a bit older than me, passed in 83, he was 72, so he had me at quite an old age. His eyesight wasn't the greatest, and he really didn't have anything to do with those old HO trains. But one day he brought a box of Lionel trains home that someone had given him. He drilled water wells part-time, and somebody he was drilling a well for gave him this box of Lionel trains. And before I knew it, he had them set up in part of the basement in his own little corner over there. And I thought, aha! You know, we didn't have a lot of expendable money to go around, and I thought, well, if he's going to like those trains, I'll get rid of my HO trains, and I'll be able to talk him into a lot more of the big Lionel trains. So I sold my stuff, and the only problem with the Lionel trains were that you couldn't get all the cool switches in O gauge that you could in HO at that time. And it was maddening trying to build a yard where you want to get your tracks close together, to get as many tracks in there as possible, to get all the storage that you can, and your main lines as well. You want to get them close together. You want the trains passing close together so it looks prototypical. The Illinois Central main line near us was a double-track main line at that time, and those trains passed relatively closely together, and it was very exciting if you got to see 2 trains pass, especially when you were a kid. I still get excited about trains, so that was kind of how it all got started. I couldn't find any switches in O gauge that really suited me, and curve switches, double crossovers, 3-ways, that sort of thing. So I just started building them myself. And you know, we as trained people are very kind of a close-knit people, and word gets around fast. And if you have trains at your house, somebody will say something, and that somebody will tell somebody else, and pretty soon you'll meet somebody, oh, can I come over and see your train? So people would come over and see our trains, and they'd say, well, look at these switches. Where did you get these? And I say, well, I built them. They'd say, well, build me some. So it was really not a plan at all. It was just kind of a hobby that got out of control, and for lack of a better word, I guess I was forced to go ahead and build these things because people wanted them. So I did, and here we are, 41 years later.
You have a very familiar story because a lot of the folks that we've talked to on the show, especially that are involved in the industry side of it now, the business started out of necessity in terms of something that was missing from the marketplace, and they saw an opening, and they just kind of ran towards the opening, and suddenly, you know, here we are, all the way. What'd you say? You said 40 years later, almost.
Yeah,
is that right?
41. It was 1972. I had been building them for a couple of years then. But I sold the first one to a complete stranger in 1972, and I kind of feel like that's when it really started. I had sold some before that, but they were like to friends. And, you know, you kind of, as a kid, you think, oh, they're just doing me a favor. But that first one to a complete stranger really was, it was really quite a moment for me. I was 14, and for somebody, a complete stranger that wasn't talked into anything by anybody, and you knew they didn't have to do it because they weren't friends of yours or of your family. That was really a kind of a proud moment in my life for sure.
Wow, so you were going at this at the age of 14, even before you could drive. Tell me a little bit about kind of what the early years of the company looked like in terms of, I assume it was working out of the house, you know, building a few at a time. Tell me a little bit about those early years.
Yeah, it was. We had a basement, which was great because it was a big basement, and it was a place for the trains and for me to experiment. And luckily, at 14, I had an older girlfriend. Tina, if you're ever out there, I think about you once in a while, kiddo. And she was 16. She could drive, and she would drive me around to train shows. I mean, from Central. We were about 70 miles south of Chicago, in Central Illinois. So the DuPage show that still goes on now in Wheaton is a once-a-month show there. And it was just in its infancy back then. It was one half of the small cafeteria building that was there. And she would drive me up there once a month. And there were some TCA events around the state, Charleston, Illinois, LaSalle, Illinois, some of the smaller towns. And that's how we kind of got the word out. And it was funny. I never really did any advertising until, the late 80s, I believe it was. And word of mouth alone just kind of kept me going, by myself, of course. And it just kind of blossomed from there. And it was a lot of fun. Met a lot of great people. That's the thing about the model railroading hobby, and O-Gauge in particular. There are just so many wonderful people that you meet, and that's really the best part of it for me. If you do a good job for them and you get a pat on the back or a handshake, that's really means the world to me.
Let's switch gears a little bit here. You guys are known for some really intricate switches, the double crossovers, the curve switches, all sorts of different configurations. Kind of walk me through the process of how you guys design a switch, and then, through the process of building it, and then how do you guys test something before you decide, yes, we're going to go ahead and we're going to build this on a production level?
Well, nowadays, and since about the early 90s, I guess, technology has just grown by leaps and bounds. And we have here in our shop now a number of CNC machinery here, CNC mills, and that's computer numeric controlled equipment, and that is you program it on a computer. So how you start out, you get an idea for something, and I'm probably the worst businessman in the world because I don't think I've ever done anything that I thought I'm going to build this and just sell 1,000 of them or 1,000,000 of them or whatever. I've always just kind of built things that I would like to have, and then I just kind of hope that other people would like to have it too. And probably not the best business acumen there, but it makes me happy. And so now I have the capability of drawing myself on the computer. You draw your idea, and you get a rendering of it, either a flat drawing of it or in 3D. And that way you can really check the fit of it and see how it's all going to go together. That drawing, you put what's called tool paths on, and there's different cutters and various machines, and you tell it which cutter to use. One of my machines has 20 cutters in it, and it will automatically change to any one of those cutters that you program it to. So that's how you make the parts for it, and we make fixtures. For instance, double crossover, we were talking about a number 8 double crossover, you and I, before we started the cast here. And that gets drawn, and then we machine out a fixture that you build it in, and then you also are machining all the parts, the various frogs in it, the middle diamond crossing, the movable points, that sort of thing. And then you build one and hope that you did everything right. And you never do. So you go back and tweak it and tweak it and tweak it. But that's kind of the beauty of the way we do things here. We're not injection molded like something made in China, like almost all the other manufacturers are. Once you build a mold, you're really married to that thing. Sometimes you can tweak a mold a little bit, but to make any kind of changes can be very difficult or impossible. And that means you have to build a whole new mold. Well, these molds can run anywhere from $20,000 to $100,000. Well, that's just prohibitive to do that, especially if you're building switches where you've got a very limited market. So the way we do things here, I build all our own fixtures here, and our guys build them, and we do build them in batches. We have 4 to 6 people working here, depending on the time of the year. And summertime it's slow, and we have part-timers come and go sometimes. But we can make a change, any change, almost overnight. So if one of our customers calls me and says, you know what, Steve, all my stuff runs through this switch except for, let's say a cab forward, for instance, from that Lionel made. Well, sometimes we can make some changes where still everything else will run through it, but also that Lionel cab forward will run through it. Now you say, why wouldn't the cab forward run through it? Well, manufacturers, and this is a pet peeve of mine, so don't get me started on this, they don't have standards in many areas. So, for instance, the tread width on a wheel, one company will make it a certain width, another company will make it a different width. And even sometimes the same company, and I won't name names, will make one locomotive with this tread width and then another locomotive with a completely different tread width. Well, that affects the way those engines run through track work, as well as the center pickup roller spacing and a few other things. And they just don't have any standards. It drives you nuts. But because of the way we do things here, a lot of the times we can make a little tweak here and there to get something that is difficult to run on other people's tracks. Sometimes even that manufacturer's track, their locomotives won't track through properly. And we can make that change here so we can get kind of a beautiful situation where everybody's trains made, everything made, will run through our equipment. And that's what we're shooting for. Always first we're looking for operation, and second we're looking for how the stuff looks. We want it to look pretty good too.
Ross products are used in a lot of different high rail layouts, even tin plate layouts. You guys seem to offer something for everybody. Obviously, you talk to a lot of people in the early planning stages of their layouts. What kind of suggestions and tips can you offer our listeners as they plan their layout to be thinking about in relation to switches and track work?
Oh boy, there's a lot of them. One of the main things when you're designing a layout or planning a layout, so many people are married to 072 switches, and that's because that was one of the few switches that were available back when I started in 1972 and has been available for years. And that was one of the only switches. I think Lionel made 072s. What else did they make? An 031. They made an 027 switch. I don't think they made but those three switches back when I first got into trains. So people think, well, 072s, they're the standard of the world. Well, that's a terrible choice to use an 072 switch in certain situations. And that would be, just for instance, when you're crossing over from one main line to another, and you go through an 072 switch. You go through the curve to the right, and you go back to the left, or vice versa. Well, that makes a real nasty S-curve in between your two mainline tracks. And trains just look like heck going through there. I mean, they jerk one way, and then they jerk back the other way. So we make some switches, which is a far better choice. We call them our number 100 and our number 101 switches. We call them our regular switches because that's the one we sell the most of by far. And those switches don't have a curve all the way through the turnout portion of the switch. They're straight coming out of all three legs. So because you get some straight in between your two mainline tracks, you don't have that real nasty S-curve in there where the trains jerk back and forth. Another spot would be in the yard, where you, as we talked about earlier, you really want to get your tracks. Most of the time, people want to get them as close together as they possibly can so they can get all the storage. There's nothing worse than having to pick up cars off the layout, take them off the layout, either put them back in the box or put them under the layout so you got room. So most people want all the yard space they can get, if for nothing else, just to store their cars and locomotives. So to be able to get more track in there is usually a beautiful thing for people. Now, if you use an 072 switch in that situation, where you're making what we call ladder tracks, where you stack up switches one after the other, maybe you'll have a right hand and then a left hand, a left hand, a left hand, a left hand, and that's where you get all those parallel tracks in a yard. Well, if you use an 072 switch in that situation, those tracks come out on 5 3/4 inch spacing, center rail to center rail. Well, if you take our number 4 switches and stack them up in the same way, those tracks come out on 3.5 inches center rail to center rail. So you're almost getting twice as many tracks. Almost. You're getting another 80%, something like that. You're getting almost twice as many tracks in this given width as you can with an 072 switch. So those switches that have an O in them, 072, 042, 054, that kind of thing, they work well in a curve where you want that switch to be part of a curve, and you want the straight portion of that switch to come out outside of the curve. So that's really where you want to use a switch like that. Or you may have a siding where you have no choice, because none of us have a football field. You have no choice but to put a switch of a certain curve in there because you need that siding to come out in a certain spot. And that's kind of the main thing that people don't understand, especially when they're coming from a tin plate type layout, or maybe they're getting back into the hobby and they've not seen what you can do today with what's on the market. And we make 47 different switches, so you can do just about anything the real railroad can do with our stuff, which makes it so versatile.
Right. And I can personally attest to, up until 3 years ago, I was tin plate track 072 switches, and when I started on my new layout, we went to Gargraves track Ross switches.
Right.
And just the especially with the larger equipment, articulated and stuff like this, and I think anybody that runs big trains can attest to this, you find out really, really quick where the weak points on your layout are, especially when it comes to track work, as soon as you start running larger engines. I can't tell you how many times I've had challengers that'll not like a certain curve radius, won't like a certain switch for one reason or another. And so I think what you're saying really attests to the planning at the beginning and planning ahead can make the biggest difference in the world, because like I said, anything that's going to go wrong, you're going to find out really quick, and it's going to be after the track work is down and everything's in place. And so I hear what you're saying about planning ahead.
Boy, you can't spend enough time planning your layout and gathering all the information that you can. I get calls literally every day from these poor guys who've spent large sums of money on different things that just don't work. Well, why did and Steve, I wish I would have heard of you first. This is what my hobby shop had, that kind of thing. So really, you want people to do their homework, and no matter what they choose, at least they've done their homework and are choosing from an educated point of view instead of just blindly buying something on impulse. That's another area too, Derek, that we talk to people about. I originally started building the switches to mate with Gargraves Flex Track, and nobody at that time was building sectional track with a separate wooden ties. So that's why we did that. And of course, the versatility to go anywhere with Flex Track is an amazing thing. Well, we started building sectional track with wooden ties. We were the first to do that. Back in the early 90s, 89, 90, I think it was. And that gives you a little bit of help, because when you bend flex track, while it is so versatile, it does take a little work to bend it, and you've got to cut the ends. Obviously, that when you bend something with 3 rails in it, the inside rail, quote unquote, grows when you bend it. So you generally have to cut that off. Well, some people don't like to do that. So what will happen a lot of times is Gargraves is just some of the best stuff around. They're flex track. And a lot of people will use our curves so they don't have to go through that bending process, and then use Gargraves flex for the straight. And the reason they do that is because Gargraves is just the most competitively priced stuff out there. I mean, it's been around for 60, 70 years. It's been the standard of the world forever, and it's priced just so attractively that it really saves you a lot of money when you go that route.
Now, do you still find time to maintain a layout at home, or does your work stay at the office?
Well, I tell you, I live here in the building. I found this old mill building in 1998, I think it was, so it's 15 years. And it was all caved in, the floors were caved in, and I bought it and fixed it as I had time. And I built a loft apartment in it, so I live with my work. It's 9,000 square feet, and I take up about 1,200 of that, and the rest is packed to the gills with our equipment and workspace for our guys and so forth. So
wow.
There on the top floor of this building, which we use for storage, is 34 by 68, and it's clear span. This building is like 2 buildings put together that I broke through the walls and connected to each other. And the one side here is 34 by 68. Now that's where I had always planned to have a layout, but we have expanded so much that we've just run out of room, and I haven't been able to use that space for a layout. So when we test here, I'm limited with what I can do. I mean, we can run trains in a, around a loop, and I can put a new switch in there and run different various locomotives and cars through it to be sure that everything works fine. But I do not have a layout right now, and it breaks my heart, frankly. A lot of people, when they turn their hobby into a business, it just kills it for them. For some reason, I just still love trains. I don't know why. I guess it just is what it is,
Now, with that situation that you're in, are you one of those guys that if an idea hits you in the middle of the night where suddenly you're going down to the workshop midnight, 1, 2 in the morning, and suddenly, sitting down in front of the computer and starting to sketch stuff out, or do you let it wait till the next day?
No, always. That always happens, especially if you're having some problem that you're trying to make a 1936 something or another run through a particular switch, and then have everything that's post-war run through it as well and smoothly. And you'll get a problem like that, and you just can't beat it, and you're pulling your hair out, and you're sitting here for days in front of the computer trying to design different things and trying to get different ideas in your head. And for me, I'll go to bed, and I'll wake up and sit bolt upright in the middle of the night, and that idea will come to me. It's just, and it almost always happens that way. It's almost funny the way that happens. It's just funny, weird. I mean, it's just, and I will immediately get up, because if you don't, you're liable to go back to sleep and forget what the idea was. So you've got to either jot it down or run down to the computer and draw your idea, or at least so you'll just remember exactly what it was. If you can go back to sleep after that. Sometimes you get so excited and get such a good idea that you don't go back to sleep. You end up sitting there for the next 15 hours in front of the computer drawing this up and making the changes to things that you need to make changes to incorporate this idea.
I bet it makes for a long day the next day.
It does, sure. But it's never. But I've never thought of my time as being worth anything. I think that's what a lot of people do in business, is they start to get the idea that they're worth $50 an hour or $100 an hour or something like that. I've just never thought of it that way. If I get an idea to do something, I just do it. I mean, what difference does it make how much time? If it takes me, if I got to sit in front of that computer for 30 hours without stopping, I'll do it. Now, one of the things about me and having your own business like this is that you can kind of make your own hours, and I get endless grief about this because I don't get up until maybe 9:30 in the morning. And people think, my God, what are you doing? But I generally work, and I certainly work between September and May from 10:30 in the morning till 1 or 2 in the morning. So people will give me a hard time, and I say, okay, I'll call you when I go to bed. And I'll say, what are you doing in bed? You're missing the best part of the day. I mean, all my guys are here until 4, sometimes 5 o'clock, and after they leave, then I'm here alone, and I can get things done uninterrupted. I don't have to answer the phone. Well, I love talking to people. You've got to take a certain amount of time to get the work done too, and you can't do that when you're talking on the phone with people or taking orders or that kind of thing. So that's the best part of my day, when everybody else goes home and then it's quiet here, and I can get another 8 hours in or more sometimes after everybody goes home for the day.
Right. Shifting gears a little bit, you guys jumped into the turntable and transfer table market in the last few years. What made you jump into that
Well,
arena?
I'll tell you, we've been making them, I think, something like 7 years now, and I forget how many hundreds we have out there, but it's not quite 1,000 yet, but we're working up towards that. And we just, over the years, and I'm talking about ever since I started, people would talk to me and say, hey, you should make a turntable. The ones that are out there right now have some difficulties. And so I would ask them, well, what are those difficulties? So over the years, I kind of kept some notes just in case I ever wanted to kind of get into that area. And we talked before about the automation here. Well, a turntable is in order to make a good turntable, it's a precision instrument. You've got to have the proper bearings, the proper fit, Things have to, especially if you make an index turntable. And an index means if you're on track 12 and you want to go to track 48, you push on our control box, you push 48, 4-8, and you push a button, and that bridge goes directly without stopping to track 48. When it gets there, it has to stop there exactly in that same spot every single time. So the only way, really, to get that kind of accuracy and that kind of precision is with CNC machine tools that have that type of precision themselves. So the parts that come off of these CNC machines are absolutely perfect, and you can get them to where your turntables have no slop in them. That drive that I designed, the drive for these turntables, once that drive situation got out of the way, and we use a timing belt and cog gears that nobody had ever done before or ever thought of, and there were probably 3 turntable manufacturers out there that I can think of. Most of them have stopped making turntables now, but that was really the fly in the ointment. There was that the drive had to be absolute precision in order to do that. And once I came up with that idea, and having this machinery already here, everything just kind of fell in place for us. And it's been a lot of fun with those things. We make an 18-inch, a 24-inch, a 27-inch, and a 33-inch, which everything made will fit on a 33-inch. Now, a big boy will actually fit on a 32-inch turntable. That's the length of the bridge on the turntable. But the axles are right on the ends of the rails on a 32-inch. So we made ours 33-inch, so you get a little bit of overhang on either side. That way you don't have to spot that locomotive. And a lot of times you're across the room when you're trying to do this, or you're a long ways away from it. So you don't have to get it in just exactly the right spot in order for it to stay on the bridge and not foul the thing when you move it.
It's funny that you mentioned the overhang on the big boy, because it sounds like Union Pacific's about to find out in the real world. There's stories going back to the old days of the big boys being in service out west, where with the regular turntables, where you would have 2-3 feet of a pilot hanging over and then the rear coupler hanging over. It's funny that the prototype isn't too far off from the way things really are in our world.
And how cool is that? And then when you start building things to scale, that's why. So you've got all kinds of scale big boys out there, and when you build a turntable to scale, you get that. And have you ever seen those videos in Cheyenne of the big boy turn? It's exactly right. That cow catcher and the whole front end is hanging out over the bridge, and so is the whole back end of the tender. And it's really cool to see that thing swinging around that turntable with all that weight suspended out there in midair is what it looks like as that thing turns around in a circle. And with the great news that UP apparently is going to redo 4014, it's a done deal, and they're doing it. So that's really exciting to see that happening again.
It gives you a new level of respect for the engineers, and even when we bring it into O-gauge, to get something that's moving with that much mass to settle into the exact right spot on the turntable, that it's relatively well balanced and it's still on the table, And like I said, we go through the same situation in O-gauge. If I'm halfway across the room and I've got an engine coming onto the table with some momentum, there's a chance that it's not going to line up the first time. And I'm sure for some of those experienced engineers that could just get that engine to stop on a dime in the middle of the table, I can't imagine how many attempts that took and that learning curve to make that happen the way it did.
Yeah, it's all very exciting to watch. I was at Train Fest in Owasso, Michigan a few years ago, and the nickel plate engine that Rich Melvin engineers and the other big Berkshire that Owasso has there at the Steam Institute were both running, in the Southern Pacific Daylight. Doyle McCormick had his 4449 there as well. And to watch those things spin around on that turntable was just a thing of beauty.
You guys seem to have conquered the world of switches and turntables. What would you like to do in the future that you haven't done yet?
Well, we're making some tin plate switches now, and people get confused when I say that sometimes, because what I call our regular line that we've been making for years, I call our high rail line. And high rail, for those folks that are just kind of coming into the hobby, kind of refers to running your three-rail trains in a more realistic manner. That is, with more realistic scenery, more realistic track work, operating the trains, as opposed to just running around in circles. You know, going back to when you're designing your layout, if you design your layout as a miniature transportation system, as a real railroad is, you can have fun with that layout for years and years and years. You see people all the time that, yeah, I built 6 layouts in the last 6 years, and it's because they're running around in circles on a tabletop, and it gets old in a hurry, and there's no reason for it. A railroad exists to deliver goods, pick up goods from one place and deliver them to another place. And that's the only reason it really exists these days. I mean, there's still passenger trains, but not like there used to be. So if you design your layout with that in mind and then operate it like a real railroad does, you can have one layout, if it's designed properly, for years and years and years. A friend of mine, Mike Premack, whose layout was featured in Model Railroader in 1989, I think it was the June 1989 issue. At that time, 3-rail layouts in Model Railroader were just unheard of. And remember, this is before the magazines Old Gauge Railroading or Classic Toy Trains. There was one paper out there that Vane Jones did out of Indianapolis, and the name of it escapes me. I'm sorry, but that it wasn't. It was kind of a. It wasn't the magazine like a magazine like we know today. It was nice. Had some nice blurbs about what was going on in the hobby in it, but that was about it. And so for Model Railroad to put Mike Premack's layout in there, they must have thought that it was a pretty cool thing. It was, I think, it was also featured in version 1 of Great Toy Train Layouts of America that Tom McComas did. But Mike Premack, I just happened to talk to him a week or two ago, beginning of August, and he still has the exact same layout. He is just as enthused about it as he was back when he built that thing in 84, 85, something like that. And it's because he runs it like a miniature railroad, a real railroad. And people come over and they have operating sessions, and they, you know, one guy works in the yard to build trains, and it's by specific order. A lumber yard needs a flat car. They deliver an empty flat car to the lumber yard. They pick it up at some later date and deliver it somewhere else, on and on and on. So that's the kind of thing that can really increase your enjoyment of the hobby. And because of the different types of switches, we make such a variety, you can really build your layout and make it just like the real thing, and have all the same tracks, you know, lead tracks and your yard tracks, and hopefully have some space to do it, as we were talking about before, because you can get a lot more tracks in a given space if you need to.
The O-Gauge market has seemed to be shifting more towards operating, really, especially in the last 20 years. What's your take on that, and what do you think the future looks like for this hobby?
Well, there's no doubt about it. Really, when I first started, it was mostly collectors, and I even got kind of frowned upon at certain shows that I would go to because the stuff I was making didn't say Lionel on them, even though they were 4 Lionel type trains, 3-rail O-Gauge trains. And there was a sort of a barrier there to break through early on. And then somewhere, like in the last 20 years, you're right, I would say again, or sometime around 88, 89, somewhere in there, the worm really started to turn. And it got more and more to where the preponderance of people these days, I believe, are operators. I don't want to blow our horn too much, but I'd like to think that we had a little bit to do with that. Certainly Gargraves, Flex Track had a lot to do with that. The other thing that people don't talk about too much is Jerry Williams. Now, Jerry Williams was really the first guy to come out with scale-type locomotives. Early on, when he came out with them in the mid-'80s, they were a far cry from what's made today. They didn't have flywheels in them. Boy, if you were going at any speed at all and you shut the power off to them, it looked like they hit a brick wall and your cars would all pile up behind them. But he was really a pioneer in making scale trains. And there was already quite a few layouts out there, scale-type layouts that had our switches on them in Gargrave's track. And so there was a lot of layouts just waiting for more scale-type equipment to come out because you could run it on our wider radius turnouts and so forth. And then Mike's Train House came along, early 90s, 92, 93, in that neck of the woods.
Yeah.
And by that time, there was a lot of layouts with our stuff on it, and they were just waiting for somebody like MTH to come along and really start making big boys and cab forwards and all the really cool stuff that they've made over the years. And then finally Lionel decided, hey, this is a market that we should have been the leader in. And they've caught up now, no doubt. But because of all this great equipment, people want to run it. You know, the days of shelf queens are kind of over. Not to say that there's still not a lot of collectors out there. There are, but certainly the preponderance of people in the hobby that I see, and I judge this by the different train shows we go to, and I'd kind of judge it by York, the big train show at York. That's twice a year in April and October. There's just a lot of guys operating these days, no doubt.
You've been listening to Steve Brenneisen from Ross Custom Switches. Steve, if folks want more information on your product, where do they need to go?
Well, we're rossswitches.com. There's 3 S's in the middle there, as an ROSSSWITCHES.com. You can get me at steve@rossswitches.com. Or you can call us on our 800 number, 800-331-1395. Always glad to hear from you, and if you have any questions or folks have a specific question, you can always call us. If you have an issue, we're not perfect. We make a mistake here once in a while. We hope not too often, but you can call and talk to me or one of the guys that answers the phone here, and you can talk to a live person, and we'll make it right for you if you have any issues.
Very cool. Steve, thanks so much for your time today. We love having you on the show. What a great interview, and hopefully we'll have you back again in the future.
Thanks, Derek. Anytime. I appreciate you having me on.
What a great interview. My special thanks to Steve from Ross Custom Switches on all the great information that he's provided. A couple of things before we go real quick. Number one, if you're listening to this, my guess is it's probably either going to be after this event has happened or maybe right before this event has happened. But this weekend I'll be traveling to Canfield, Ohio for the Lionel Customer Service Open House. Going to bring a big fat wallet and hopefully buy a lot of parts and a lot of trains. Plus, who can pass up the chance to harass Mike Reagan a little bit more? Anyway, if you're going to be at the event this weekend, I'll be around. Make sure you find me, say hello, introduce yourself. Would love to meet you guys that are at the event this weekend. If it's after the event, well then start making plans to come next year. The other thing, one more time before we go, do not forget to sign up for our email list. You can do that at notch6.com. That's how I'm going to pass out all the information on upcoming shows. We'll use the Facebook page as well, but email seems to be the preference for a lot of people. That's it for this month's episode of Notch 6. Until next time, keep it at Notch 6.
Thanks for listening to Notch 6. You can find us on Facebook for all the latest news and previews of our next show. Be sure to subscribe to the show on iTunes so you'll receive the show as soon as it's posted. If you have any questions or comments, email notch6@gmail.com. That's NOTCHSIX@gmail.com. We'll see you again soon. Until then, be sure to keep it in Notch 6.